According to a report from Cleveland.com's Mary Kay Cabot, Cleveland Browns fans are finally going to get what they've been waiting for. Not only is Shedeur Sanders going to see first team reps in the joint practices on Wednesday with the Carolina Panthers, Shedeur Sanders will be the starting quarterback for the Browns preseason opener Friday night in Carolina against the Panthers. We're going to talk about it, break it down. Browns 3D on the OBR streaming network begins now. Welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends, your daily delivery of all things Dog Pound Browns 3D on the OBR streaming network. I am your host, Jeff Lloyd. We appreciate all of you who come on out to the OBR Daily for your favorite Cleveland Browns coverage. And while you're there, of course, over at the OBR.com, highly suggest you check out the VIP package. With that, you get access to the insider forums. You also have the Ask the Insiders um, ability as well to speak with us on your favorite, questions pertaining to the Cleveland Browns training camp and everything. Obviously, as we kick off preseason week 1, so make sure you check all of that out. Over a month or so, you get a subscription to Premium Plus along with it. So it's just not one purchase; it actually turns into two. Everybody that, of course, supports us here and comes out every night to the OBR streaming network. We thankful for you all and appreciative to you all. Tuesday, so you will have the React at 7 o'clock. 9 o'clock, you will have Garage Beers as well with Mike Keefe. You will have Meredith Kane from 92.3 on there with Mike Keefe as well. So it should be a great Garage Beers. Make sure you check that out as well. Make sure you subscribe to the OBR on YouTube. And of course, make sure you subscribe to the OBR over on Twitch. Now, the Browns, it is a transition day for them today as the Cleveland Browns will head on down to Carolina to begin the joint practices and, of course, the subsequent week 1 preseason game Friday night in Carolina at 7 p.m. Um, Obviously, we're going to get a little bit, heavy here as far as the quarterback position is concerned. The Browns did late yesterday, sign Snoop Huntley. If anybody remembers, or a couple of weeks ago, I said that a veteran quarterback at some point was probably going to be brought in. I do think, Kenny Pickett's ailment with the hamstring, I think Dillon Gabriel's ailment with the hamstring certainly, accelerated that process. It was looking, at points yesterday that maybe Shedeur Sanders was going to be the only quarterback available for the preseason game. And obviously that is not, any any way to go into a preseason game or any game there ever with one quarterback and one quarterback only. Huntley, because he was with the Cleveland Browns last summer, can come in here and has a pretty decent knowledge of the playbook. So it is a quick turnaround for Huntley to be coming in officially Monday after practice. No practice today, probably just getting coached up, on some of the stuff that maybe he's unfamiliar with within the current system. But Huntley certainly is able to play and should be able to contribute somewhat Friday night in the preseason opener. Now, with that news, that basically kind of, put into perspective that Kenny Pickett and Dillon Gabriel are most likely going to be out of the preseason game. What anybody does Wednesday in the joint practices with the Panthers, well, obviously we're going to wait and see how that works. Joe Flacco certainly, and again, at his age, Joe has been the one that's been the most healthy, no issues thus far through training camp. So there is the irony of, the 40-year-old guy is the one that's gotten through training camp without any bumps and bruises to this point. So you expect Joe to certainly get some work on Wednesday. Whether or not, they're going to deem Gabriel and Pickett healthy enough to participate in the joint practices tomorrow, that's going to remain to be seen. I mean, it's one thing when you're going to do it with your own team, and obviously your defense knows and understands that maybe your quarterback's not 100%. But when you get in these joint practices, it's certainly a little bit of a different level, and it's certainly a step up from your own practices, while it is a step below certainly live football. So, whether or not, Pickett or Dillon Gabriel are going to be able to participate Wednesday in these joint practices, that remains to be seen. I'm not sure, of course, with nothing going on today, where both of these guys are in relation to what appeared to be a little bit more work than we were expecting yesterday for both of them. But this kind of leads to the opportunity that I think we've all, kind of been waiting for. Shedeur Sanders has kind of been waiting in the wings here all of training camp, waiting for a bigger opportunity, waiting for an opportunity to, play with a little bit higher up as far as, the first string. Most of Shedeur's work to this point has been with the second string and the third string, no work yet with the first string. And it's kind of hard to tell, of course, what exactly the first string is going to mean in regards to Friday night. But you would think first string in practice tomorrow is going to have, basically the starters. So Shedeur is going to, get a little work there and obviously get all prepped and be ready to start the preseason game on Friday night. I think at this point, and I think we're all in agreement that this way it's working out with this quarterback room right now, it's just nuts. And I don't think anybody has any rhyme or reason how anything has been shaking out to this point. And certainly a lot of clamoring for Shedeur Sanders to get a little bit more of an opportunity. And I said yesterday, I think that's fair for anybody who's questioning that. But it does seem now and starting to get the feel that after all this is done, I think Shedeur Sanders is probably just going to end up the number 2 quarterback. And even if they kind of held him back a little bit here the first couple of weeks, um, Kenny Pickett, if Joe Flacco is going to be the starter, unless somebody somehow ends up on IR, I think Kenny Pickett is the one you move on from. I mean, the way they talk about Dillon Gabriel and the things they rave about some of the things with Dillon Gabriel, it certainly hasn't translated into much success in practice yet. But the way they speak on him certainly makes it sound like the Browns feel, that they want to see more. Shedeur Sanders is not going anywhere, regardless of what anybody thinks. And the fact that maybe he's getting, the less of the workload, which has been true to this point, of course. But Shadeur's not going anywhere. And, I don't need, Uncle Luke from Two Live Crew, and I certainly don't need RG3 commenting on what's going on in Browns training camp. You guys are just shooting off and you're just trying to get your name out there and just trying to pump up, your own public profile, which makes no sense if you're watching this. And, if you just said the Browns are taking it slowly with the quarterback they drafted in the 5th round, it wouldn't matter that it was Shedeur Sanders or Bill Smith or, Steve Sanders. Who cares? A 5th round quarterback, taking it slow with him is certainly the right approach. But now we're, getting to this point, and we've certainly gotten to this point where, things have certainly changed. And, I think the Browns probably need to come out and publicly speak tomorrow when they do, from the joint practices. And, don't make this sound like it's, something where it's maybe injury related. You should spin this positively. And, hey, Shedeur Sanders, through his work, has earned the right, has earned the opportunity, for, more meaningful practice reps, for the opportunity to start this preseason game. Now, Shedeur himself and has handled everything like an absolute pro. And every time he speaks to the media and, the answers he gives and, how he just basically eloquently speaks on it, this is such a different version of what everybody tried to tell us Shedeur was during the draft process. And look, it got out of hand. It certainly went the wrong way. It went a way that was just absolutely not fair necessarily to Shedeur Sanders. I think some of, people's beliefs or maybe dislike of his dad certainly was dropped into Shedeur's lap, which is 100% unfair. But now you sit here, and for whatever's gone on for the last 2 weeks, here is the chance for Shedeur to just take an opportunity and basically separate. Joe Flacco is going to be the starting quarterback for this team. There's no way around it. You're going to give yourself a chance to be competitive. And with that, Joe Flacco right now gives you that best opportunity. If that goes awry, or when it goes awry, and you realize that your chance for competing this year is, maybe not there, you're going to have to settle in on one of these two rookie quarterbacks and basically to say, let's see what the kid has. And right now, I don't think there's anybody that wants to see Dillon Gabriel before they see Shedeur Sanders. It's just that simple. Shedeur is the better player. He has performed better in training camp. There may be these traits and, things that, work in the quarterback room, work in the, offensive film room, all of those things. That's great. But if it's not translating to success on the field, it doesn't mean jack to me. I'm not going to lie to you. I don't care how fast he processes. I don't care how great he is on a whiteboard. I don't care how great he is at, watching and diagnosing film. If it is not translating to success, it doesn't matter. It doesn't. Now, again, you don't know necessarily who are going to be the guys that are going to be out there playing with Shedeur on Friday night. And, the Browns have usually been really, really hesitant about playing their upper talent players in these preseason games. I agree with it. I've never had an issue with that. The last thing I want to do is see anybody go down in August. But I'd also like to see them maybe give Shedeur a puncher's chance here on Friday night. I'm not saying you need David Njoku out there. You're probably not going to get Jerry Jeudy, but I don't see any other wide receiver that shouldn't be out there in an attempt to prove themselves. Deontay Johnson, Cedric Tillman, Jamari Thrash, Florio, Lavardane. All these guys should be in rotating with number 12. You want to give Shedeur a legit shot here. And, offensive line wise, look, I mean, you're going to tell me you're going to probably sit Joel Bitonio. I get it. Could you be sitting 4/5 of the starting offensive line? It's probably most likely going to happen. Heck, they could probably sit all 5. I don't like that, certainly, for the aspects of, trying to get Shedeur real work. Carolina has hinted that, they are going to be starting some, number ones. Don't know necessarily what that means. And of course, we won't have all of that information probably till sometime on Friday as to how all that's going to work out, as to who's in and who's essentially out for the 7 p.m. kickoff. But you have to think that Carolina, if you're saying that, and I know the Browns have said it in the past too, and then all of a sudden we're pulling everybody, and this was during the Stefanski, regime. Oh, the joint practices went pretty well. We feel we don't necessarily need the work in the preseason game. And certainly Carolina could choose to, change their course at any point. So again, we don't know what, playing some starters means. It's obviously a very vague statement to put out there. And it's certainly easy to change your mind, down the road closer to actual kickoff. But I'm excited. I think everybody should be excited. This is kind of all the conversations we've been having since January. And, this room is probably not going to be that great looking. Maybe there's a potential for something. You got Joe back. So right away for me, that was okay. Well, there's your starter. I'm sorry. I just never saw that Kenny Pickett thing being legitimate. And certainly any thought I had or belief that it wasn't legitimate was confirmed, for me at least, when you signed Joe. We've seen Joe with this team. We've seen Joe within this offense. Joe's got the natural NFL arm talent, throws the ball with ease, even at his age. He's just got an absolute hookah for a right arm. So, that gives you the best chance to be competitive starting week 1. Can Joe keep it up for a sustained amount of time? To be determined, certainly. And, if there's anybody that could possibly be the future of this team at the quarterback position, and I'm not saying it's going to happen or it's not going to happen, at least Shedeur Sanders gives you the possibility of having a long-term starting quarterback. Again, it may not mean a hill of beans when the Cleveland Browns hold 2 first-round draft picks in the 2026 NFL draft. But for all our reservations, for all our concerns, and, for what basically everybody was hoping for and everybody wanted, it looks like the time is now for Shedeur Sanders. And again, it needs to be spoken about that this is earned. It needs to be, mentioned that, it was time to give him a bigger slice of the pie. They don't have to go up there and defend themselves. as opposed to defend themselves into their handling of Shedeur to this point. They don't have to answer those questions. This isn't necessarily now about the past. It is more about the present and the future. And for now, for at least for this week in the preseason, Shedeur Sanders is going to be your starting quarterback against Carolina Panthers. Certainly gives a lot more juice to this 7 o'clock kickoff. Browns fans were going to be there watching regardless, but obviously now it's going to be a little bit different because of the fact that we are now in a position where the fan base and now even NFL media wise, there's going to be a lot more interest, from them within this game. We'll see, obviously the simple things, breaking the huddle, getting to the line of scrimmage quickly, getting everybody lined up, getting your pre-snap reads in, of course, and then, snapping the ball and going through your progressions and all of these things. I'm excited for sure. I really am. Um, who knows exactly what would have come from practice again, I don't necessarily care what's gone on. I care where we're at. And it certainly has, basically all eyes forward for Shedeur. And it should begin tomorrow in the joint practices with Carolina. Certainly an opportunity that he has worked for. Just, biding his time, quietly, politely, doing things the correct way. Certainly there's ways Shedeur could have handled this that would have been bad, and he has not done any of that. He has handled this 100% the way it needed to be handled. Not looking to throw anybody under the bus. No, not, pointing fingers. He's been absolutely world class to this point in how this situation has been handled. We're certainly going to, get a different look tomorrow when, it is now a joint practice. And, it's always one of the bigger things, that come from this type of stuff is, finally getting to, smack around somebody who's not your teammate, somebody that you don't necessarily have the relationship with, and just going out there and, seeing if, practicing against an actual opponent, against your teammates, just gives an extra feel to it, has guys finding an extra gear, an extra level. And we'll see. And, we'll get some early indications just from Wednesday alone in the joint practices about, does the offense maybe look better? Because I think that's been part of the issue here. Is I think people, certainly down on the offense, and I would say that's fair. Monday was kind of a cleaner day. Certainly didn't result with the ball crossing the goal line, of course. But this can also kind of come out as a measuring stick for the Browns as far as, is the defense playing well? And is that, holding back the Browns offense? Or is the Browns offense just necessarily just having issues and just not getting it done at this point? And we'll get a better idea of that tomorrow. And we'll certainly get a much clearer picture, Friday night. And again, it's, I understand the reason to not play your best players, of course, and, the value in protecting them again. But again, you've got to give them something to work with. You absolutely have to give him something to work with. And it's not like, Lavardane or Floria are bad options necessarily because, that who Shedeur has had to primarily his work with, but other than Jerry Jeudy at the wide receiver position, I don't really see anybody that I just say, whoa, 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 they should not be playing in a preseason game in week one, at least. No, I'm sorry. I don't see a guy there that, the Browns should not be playing. Running back gets a little trickier, I would say, because maybe if you don't play Jerome Ford, I can get it, with no picture whatsoever on the Quinshon Judkins scenario. You're going to need Jerome Ford, and I'm not going to say to be the lead back, but you're going to need Jerome Ford, to essentially be the starting running back at this point. And, I don't think the Browns' belief for Dillon Sampson is ever something that's going to be a crazy workload where he's getting 20 touches a game. Not that he couldn't handle it, because he certainly showed us that at Tennessee. But my belief is that, the Browns feel that, somewhere that, 10, 12, 15 touches for Dillon Sampson, maybe the number goes a little higher if he's just, on a heater and just absolutely tearing it up. But, for Sampson, right now it's he and it's Jerome Ford, so there is going to be, I would say, an easing in process in these preseason games as he gets established and obviously starts to get, a little bit more acclimated to NFL speed, because practicing against your own defense is one thing. The practices that are going to go on Wednesday and certainly the game Friday night are, at a whole different level. So, my belief is that Dillon Sampson's going to get some work. Certainly not going to be extensive work, for Sampson. And, maybe Jerome Ford ends up one of the guys that's not going to play. So certainly, going to look at that situation. Um, Harold Fannin should certainly be in line for some legit run as the Browns, figure out, how the rest of the tight end room is going to work after David Njoku. Fannin, the key on Wednesday in the practices and certainly on Friday. As much as everybody's going to get excited about the receiving aspect of Harold Fannin, I think, the bigger thing is going to be, viewing and certainly evaluating and, seeing where Harold is, coming along in the other aspects of the tight end position. I don't have many concerns with Harold Fannin as far as his receiving ability and what I think he can bring to the Browns sooner rather than later. It is a big jump certainly for Fannin and, competition going from, of course, the MAC. There was film, of course, against him against, Penn State and Texas A&M, and he certainly was. When you watch those types of things, you ask yourself, does this look like a guy that should be on the other team? And that was certainly the case for Harold Fannin in those games. So, and it's not the easiest thing in the world, for a rookie tight end to just come in and, torch things. Brock Bowers is, certainly the exception to that rule. Tight ends, it certainly takes a little while, kind of a marination process, to get acclimated, into the receiving game from the tight end position. But we have seen Shedeur work well with the tight ends thus far through camp. So, to watch the way the rest of that room works out, over the next couple of days down in Carolina is, certainly going to be pretty pivotal and pretty big, of course. Again, the offensive line, I have no idea what to make of anything. I mean, there's a really good chance, in my opinion, you're sitting all of them. And I get it. Certainly understandable. I just hope you can put out enough that it's, going to give the offense the ability to at least function, if we're saying. Defensively, you'd think of the defensive line, probably, Miles, it'll be, a light couple days down in Carolina. The practice will get some work. There will be no way whatsoever Miles Garrett is putting on a uniform Friday night. He wants to put on his jersey and pants just to stand there and observe. Knock yourself out, Miles, but, you were certainly not taking the field. And then, you're going to get to other aspects of that defense that really are going to need to be, monitored here over the next few days. Can, of course, Carson Schlesinger keep up what has been a great start for him thus far? And, from day one, because Hicks missed the first two practice while he was, confirming his decision that he was going to hang him up. And, once that was official, Schlesinger just became the starting Mike, and to this point has done nothing to show that he is not ready for it. You watch all these cut-ups from practice each and every day, and the one consistency you kind of get out of it is, oh my God, Carson Schlesinger is basically in on everything. Whoever is running the ball or whoever is the ball is being thrown to, you find 49 in the frame. He's really, really had a strong start to all this. Highly believe, probably a series, if not two, maybe a tad bit more on Friday night, because if he's going to be your starting Mike, he's going to need the work. You know what I'm saying? He's just going to have to get, I think the only thing that could possibly hold Carson Schlesinger back early is just getting acclimated to the NFL speed. And with that, and as the confidence grows, and I've said it 100 times in regards to Carson Schlesinger, it's only 1 year of legitimate play at UCLA. I honestly believe that Carson Schlesinger has one more jump in ability that we're going to see, and it could be as soon as 2025. Once he gets the defense right, he gets the calls right, he gets his confidence level where it needs to be against the, jump in competition, that, Schlesinger is just going to be an absolute star. I really think that Carson Schlesinger is going to be a guy that, just lock it in 120 plus tackles a season, year in, year out. Just it's going to happen. And, certainly a very, very smart blitzer, 3 sacks last year at UCLA, really shoots the gap well, you know, comes with, power and speed, but, doesn't come so fast that he's out of control and, one juke move and he's on the ground. Very sound technical player to go along with all the athletic ability that he has. Next couple of days are going to be huge for the cornerback position. And, Greg Newsome, my guess is, he with the shoulder is probably not going to be a part of anything. And if, I don't know what the whole deal is with Greg's shoulder, basically you just say a shoulder injury. But if Greg Newsome's got a shoulder injury, then, he is tabled from contact, in my opinion, till week 1. I am not putting or risking the only other cornerback besides Denzel Ward, who's got legit experience through any of this. I'm just not. I highly believe the Browns need to be in a market for a cornerback. Maybe they're going to, go in Friday night, evaluate the guys they have. But the Browns are in serious need, in my opinion, at the cornerback position. They need to get somebody else in here because, Cam Mitchell can go to the nickel. Cam Mitchell doesn't have much of a resume. Miles Harden we'd like to see. Again, not much of a resume. Nick Needham, it's a guy I'm kind of speaking on because I thought he was a really, decent player on some poor Dolphins teams back in the day. But, his last big workload that was evaluated was like almost 3 seasons ago. So it's hard to believe that, just because, he's here now and may have the opportunity at a bigger role, that maybe he's that same player that he was in 2022. Safety position certainly, just has a lot to it, after Grant Delpit, you have Hickman trying to fight off a couple of veterans. For Hickman, it's there to be had for Ronnie Hickman. The opportunity is there to be seized. And, can Ronnie step up and take this? Or is he just not going to prove enough? And the Browns are going to go with, KZ or Jenkins just because, they just didn't have enough confidence to make Ronnie Hickman the starter. This talk on Sanders and the way the Browns have handled the situation, or, in many of the naysayers' eyes, out to get him, out to break him, sabotage him. It's a stinking crock, man. It really is. And the thing, and it's probably not going to happen this year, of course. The thing I love is, when it comes to Cleveland Browns, is, so many people who don't talk about them, or national guys, all of a sudden want to jump in. They always jump in when it's negative. You know what I'm saying? They want to jump in and, stomp on the weakling, so to speak. And then in times where the Browns were good, 2020, 2023, all of them have to sit there and kind of eat their crow and, throw out these superlatives because, they tried to, beat a dead horse and then had to come back to bite him in the can. Again, I don't know that's necessarily going to be the case this year. But look, we've all waited patiently. We've, wanted this opportunity for Shedeur Sanders to come. And now it is here. And, the opportunity is there. He's going to get a larger amount of practice reps, supposedly with the ones. Of course, we were told this once before about Monday, and that didn't happen. See if it comes to fruition this time, Wednesday in Carolina against Panthers in practice. And Shedeur will be starting the preseason opener. I mean, this is everything Browns fans were hoping for. I think what it is everybody wants to have some hope that there might be hope that there is a guy in that quarterback room who could maybe be the starter for a while. Again, not saying it's going to happen, not saying, you know, it's a lock because the Browns hold those 2 first-round picks, but we've waited patiently, some of us not so patiently, but Shedeur Sanders is about to get the uptick in the Browns quarterback room, and it's coming during week 1 of the NFL preseason. I am Jeff Lloyd. We appreciate you all for coming out to the OBR every single day for your favorite Cleveland Browns content. Head on over to the OBR.com now. Get in on the VIP access. You will be able to access the insider forums. You will also be able to work with the Ask the Insiders, have your questions answered. Just a great, great tool to have for a small fee. So go ahead and check all that out. Of course, and I'm thankful for all of you coming out every night to the OBR streaming network, beginning at 6 o'clock with Browns 3D. Tonight being Tuesday, you have the React at 7. You have Garage Beers with Mike Keefe at 9. So make sure you stick around for a jam-packed evening of Cleveland Browns talk. And of course, make sure you subscribe to the OBR on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to the OBR on Twitch. All that being said, this has been your daily delivery of all things Dog Pound. Browns 3D on the OBR streaming network, and we will talk to you all tomorrow.